Good morning to everyone who is watching us. I would like to thank very much for the organizers for inviting me to have this lecture, this very important conference. It's a pleasure for me and it's an honor to present the Israeli water sector in this very important conference. My name is Yechezkel Lifshitz. I'm acting Director General in the Ministry of Water Resources of Israel. And I have a short presentation about the Israeli water sector. I think it's one of the very most interesting sectors around the world. Israel is very known for its achievements in the water sector. And that's because of many years of experience and because of the water scarcity in our region. So I will start with the presentation, and hopefully in the afternoon of your time, I'm supposed to take part in a panel where I'll be able and happy to answer questions about my presentation about the Israeli water sector also. So I will now share my presentation. I hope that everyone can see the presentation and the slides. Well, again, my name is Yechezkel Lifshitz. I'm Acting Director General, Israeli Water Resources in Israel. And as you can see, the problem of water scarcity is not only a problem of Israel. Also, our neighbors, the closer and more forest neighbors, have the same problem. The rain, due to the climate change, the rain is reducing during the years. We're having less and less rain all the time during the years. And you can see Jordan, which is Israel has a border with, and Iran, that are a little far from Israel, also suffer from a water shortage. And I'm sure that it's a well-known problem all over the world, also in Europe, in America, other countries have the same problem of water shortage. Well, you can see Israel is a very small country, but you can see in Israel that about half of the country is under what we call the desert line. What does it mean? It means that in the most rainy part in Israel, which is in north of Israel, here, we have about 800 or 1,000 millimeters of rain every year. But about half of the country of Israel can be considered as a desert. We have 150 millimeters and less, about half of the country. But still in Israel, we have 24/7 water supply. Every tap in Israel that you open, you can drink its water. And also the agriculture is very developed in Israel, sometimes especially in these areas that can be considered as a desert in other parts of the world. You can see that it's a worldwide problem. In 1995, the water scarcity countries in the world faced water scarcity, but the future is not telling us good news. You see, the water scarcity is going to be in many other countries in the world problem. You can see the orange color and other colors. So more and more countries and states in the world are going to suffer from water shortage. It's going to be a worldwide problem. We can see that many other countries in the world are starting to understand that water is a big issue, and you have to manage the water and treat the water carefully in order to leave enough water for the next generations. Well, first, I'll give you a short visit card about Israel water sector. So in Israel, we have about 9 million residents, about 1,000 industrial plants, and the annual volume is about $3 billion US dollars. The water demand in Israel, in all kinds of water, is about 2.2 billion cubic meters a year. We also give water according to the peace agreements. We give the Jordan Kingdom about 50 million cubic meters a year. And according to the peace agreement with the Palestinian Authority, are obligated to give about 60 million cubic meters a year. But due to the demand, we give more than we're obligated according to the peace agreement. You can see that about 60% of the water demand is agriculture, about 1.2 billion cubic meters a year. And when I say demand in the agriculture sector, I mean all kinds of water. That means effluent, potable water, and other kinds of water. We'll speak about it in a few minutes. So as I mentioned, the water demand in Israel is about 2.2 billion cubic meters a year. But unfortunately, the water demand, the water enrichment is 1.2 billion cubic meters. That means the natural water that we get is only 1.2 billion cubic meters a year. And so that means we have a natural gap of every year of 1 billion cubic meters. So how do you close this gap of 1 billion cubic meters? We're speaking about three main pillars. The first one is water saving, which is pretty strong in Israel. All children are educated how to save water. The second one is water reuse. And the third one is desalination. And I'll speak now in a few slides about each one of these pillars. So first, water saving. Water saving in Israel is a big issue. All the children, the kindergarten and preschool, and also students are taught how to save water. And I can give you an example of myself. If one of my children is taking a shower, if the shower is too long, there's another child comes and knocks on the door and tell him, hey, we don't have enough water here in Israel. Finish your shower and save water. If you brush your teeth every morning and evening, you don't leave the tap open. When you brush your teeth, you close the tap and you don't waste water. If you wash your dishes, when you put soap on the dishes, the tap is closed. You can see on the left-hand side of the slide, this model. It's a picture that was taken from a campaign that was taken about 15 years ago. In order to encourage people to save water, there was an advertisement in the media. It said, if you want to save water, our ground will look like the face. The face were drying out, and the man in the media was saying, you have to save water. If we want to save enough water, this is our land will look like. On the bottom part of the slide, you can see this equipment that had been delivered to every citizen in Israel. This equipment saves water. It reduces the water in the tap. It helps us to save a lot of water. And you can see the campaign was very efficient. Using this campaign was taking part in the years 2005, 2007. We managed to reduce the water demand in the domestic sector in about 15%, from about 110, 105 cubic meters a year for less than 90. Water reuse in Israel is very important. In Israel, we take care of all the sewage, and about 85% of the sewage is taken for agriculture. We are #1 in the world in this water reuse. All the sewage is treated, and the agriculture uses almost all this treated sewage is used for agriculture. A lot of vegetables, fruits are exported from Israel according to very high international standards, although they use treated sewage. One of the biggest treatment plant in Israel is called the Shafdan. Shafdan takes all the sewage from the main part of Israel, the center of Israel, Tel Aviv and the region, takes care of this sewage, put it into the aquifer, mix it with natural water. Of course, these water are not drinkable. And then the water are taken to the southern and dry part of Israel used for agriculture. So if you visit the Israeli desert, actually, the Negev, the southern part of the country, all this area, all this region uses treated sewage. You can see at the beginning that a few decades ago, the agriculture was relying mainly on potable water, but since we realized that we cannot rely on potable water for agriculture, we are using less and less potable water for agriculture and more treated sewage, effluent and brackish water for agriculture. But the game changer in Israel is desalination. Since we realized that we don't have enough water for everyone, population is growing all the time. We have about 2% growth in population in Israel. We understood that we have to rely on desalination more and more. That's why we built 5 desalination plants in Israel. All in all, they produce about 600 million cubic meters a year, which is about 80%, between 75 to 80% of the water demand in Israel, of the domestic sector. So since the year 2016, about 80% of the water comes from desalination. That means that if you visit in Israel, there is a big chance that most of the water you'll drink will come from desalination. All the 5 desalination plants are PPP projects. That means that owned by the private sector, and the state, the Israel, buy the water from desalination plants. And in the future, we are going to build more desalination plants, and I'll speak about it soon. You can see the difference between the year 2005 and 2020. In the year 2005, about 71% of the demand, the source of it was natural water. In the year 2020, this year, only 50% for all kinds of, for agriculture, domestic sector, industry, only 50% of the water will come from natural sources, and more water are coming from desalination. Of course, desalination is much more expensive than natural water, but you can see that the cost of the water coming from desalination is going down over time. The last tender that we had, we declared on the winner only about two months ago. The price of the water of every cubic meter was cut in half. That means in 2005, the first desalination plant that was built in Israel, we paid about 80 American cents for every cubic meters. The last tender of Sorek 2, the winner will charge, the state will charge the government only half, about 40 American cents for every cubic meters. As far as I know, it's the lowest price in the world. It's mainly because the winner is going to use natural gas. As you know, Israel found natural gas in the sea, and the winner is going to use natural gas in order to produce electricity and to use it for its engines, because the cost of desalination mainly comes from energy. So if the energy is cheap, that means that the owner can charge the country, can charge the government for a very low price. Also in Israel, what's unique is that we have very deep drills for water. We drill for about 1.5 kilometer deep in order to take very ancient water, very low quality of water. This water is mixed with natural water, and it's used mainly for agriculture. Water security is also very important in Israel. We are tracking the water all the time in order to avoid poisoning of the water, and in order to avoid, of course, water crisis. And you can see these dots, these fish. These fish are located in different places in Israel. The water that comes from the national, they swim actually in the water that comes from the national system. And if there's a special camera that traces these fish all the time, and it's being measured all the time. And if the fish do not behave normally, the water source is stopped, and there's an alert, and we know that something is happening. something happens. I don't know whether it's poisoning, whether it's other problem, but it's being taken care all the time very closely in order to avoid water poisoning. Innovation and technology in Israel is very strong. We have many Israeli high-tech companies that deal with water in order to avoid water loss, in order to reduce the energy that we use for the water sector. Of course, the water and cyber is very strong in Israel because Israel is a well-developed country, and since that, cyber is very important. The water energy nexus also is very important, and water quality and wastewater quality is being traced all the time with very high-tech companies. About 2 years ago, we had 5 years of drought, one after the other. One of the most severe periods of droughts that we had in Israel. Because of that, we approved in the government a plan for the year 2030. That means that we have 5 desalination plants that, as I mentioned before, produced 600 million cubic meters a year. And we declared that in the year 2030, we are going to almost double this amount of desalination. We set up a target for the year 2030 that will have 1.1 billion cubic meters that will come from desalination. So for now, we are building 2 new desalination plants. One of them is Sorek 2, and the other one will be built in the Western Galilee. And we'll need between 100 and 200 million cubic meters a year for the year 2030 in order to achieve this goal. It's very ambitious goals because, you know, PPP projects are not easy to extract, but we are going to stand in this goal because the population is growing, the needs are growing all the time, and that we don't know what the future will be. The rain is reducing all the time. That means we'll have to rely more and more on desalination. One very important and very interesting project in Israel, we don't have too many natural sources of water in Israel. One of them, it's well known in the world, is called the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. It's located in the north of Israel. 2 years ago, the sea level of the Sea of Galilee was very low. We almost reached the black level. That means we cannot pump water anymore from the Sea of Galilee. And that's why we are building now a pipe that will be able to put back into the Sea of Galilee this water that will come from desalination. That means that instead of treating the nature as the supplier of water, we're now treating the nature as a consumer. So we're building a pipe that in about 2 years, 3 years, will be able to put water that will come from our national system. It will be taken, we'll have the ability to taking back into nature, back into the Sea of Galilee. So if we'll face future droughts, we'll be able to put desalinated water back into nature. Also in Israel, we don't have too many places to travel. Israel is a very small country. And since we don't have too many rivers and lakes, we decided that instead of taking water from desalination, from rivers and lakes for agriculture and for drinking, we're going to bring it back to nature. So you can see these dots. These dots are in the north part of Israel. Instead of taking from these rivers and lakes water for agriculture and for drinking, we're going to release the water, bring the farmers and agriculture other sources that will come from desalination, and we'll be able to bring it back to nature. But future projects, we are going to enlarge the investments in the national system. We're going to, from 1 billion shekels, which is about $300 million a year, is going to be 1.5 billion shekels a year. We're going to enlarge the Shafdan, the largest sewage treatment plant in Israel. It's going to be enlarged in order to take care of the sewage. We're going to drill about 100 new wells in Israel for the coming 4 years approximately, and other massive projects will be built in Israel in the coming future. Well, thank you very much again for the opportunity. I encourage everyone, after this COVID-19 will be over, I encourage everyone to visit in Israel. Israel is a very interesting country. We have a desert from one side of the country and lakes on the other side of the country. We have high-tech companies. We have ancient, on one hand, very ancient places in Israel, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. On the other hand, we have very, very vast high-tech companies that look at the future. So I'm supposed to take part in the panel afternoon. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much. My name is Lifshitz of Ministry of Water Resources in Israel.